Now we get into the talk story part of the evening, where we talk about Hawaiian history, legends, language, healing, the philosophy that we call Huna, based on 7 ideas about life, that the world is what you think it is. There are no limits. Energy flows where attention goes. Now is the moment of power. To love is to be happy with. All power comes from within, and effectiveness is the measure of truth. We talk about all these things in the way that I was brought up in this knowledge, and partly by storytelling, partly by question and answer. So this evening I'm going to start off with a story, an old Hawaiian legend. This one is from the Big Island. And of course, being from the Big Island, doesn't have to, but this one does involve Pele, the volcano goddess. It also involves very interesting kind of character. You don't hear very much about him anymore today, but at one time he was extremely popular. A very, very ancient character. Here in the islands, even before Pele, what you have in these islands are a number of kinds of heroes or gods or demigods that have a very definite shamanic kind of cast to them. Maui was one. Lots of stories about him. The island name is a little different, but lots of stories about him, and he was a shamanic type of character. Everybody hears about him, but the one you don't hear too much about, unless you live here for a while, is a character called Kamapua'a. Kamapua'a was a very much like, an entity very much like Pan of the European forests. He was a wild man of the wilderness. His name means literally pig child. Some people think it was a derivation of another form of the great creator god Kane, because sometimes that form was called Kanepua'a. Pua'a means pig. And Kamapua'a, pig child, is often the name. More like a demigod in most of the traditions, but the word demigod in Hawaiian is kupua. And the word kupua is always a giveaway for a shamanic element in the person or in the story. Because kupua was not only a demigod, it was a magician. It was a hero. It was a trickster. And all of those are contained in that word. And this was what Kamapua'a was. Well, he was a wild man, and often he could turn himself into a pig. And some people aren't sure whether he was actually a pig who could turn himself into a human. He went back and forth, and sometimes he stopped halfway in between. So in some of the stories, this is where he looks a lot like Pan. He's got the feet of a pig, and the legs, the legs of a pig, and of a hairy pig, and the upper body of a man. Okay? Well, like the pig in Hawaiian thinking, he also was a representation of virility, real male energy, and was sometimes when he was considered a deity, he was a deity of the source of male energy in Hawaiian thinking, which was rain. In the Hawaiian way of thinking, male energy came from the heavens, going back all the way originally to a heaven being, or sometimes called a sky father, which is really too limited, but a kind of the god of space, who was named Wakea. And the god of the earth, or the goddess actually, was Papa, and the goddess of form. And so female energy came from the earth upwards, male energy came from the heavens downward. And so one of the obvious things that comes from heavens downward is rain. And so Kamapua'a was always associated with rain. And because he was associated with rain, it was also associated with the green, wild, growing things of the forest. But he was a pretty lusty kind of entity as well. And well, after Pele came to the islands, we don't have too many stories about him before that, although every island has Kamapua'a stories. The big story of a battle that Kamapua'a had here on Kauai, I won't tell you the whole story of that one right now, but you can see there are traces of it. Next time on a clear day and you're on your way to Lihui, or you're getting up close to the Haupu Mountains, that's that range of mountains that's, that rise above Lihui, on the other side of the bay and the other side of the Hulea River. Why, if you look at a cliff, it's like a straight cliff on the other side, and there's this big mark. If you look at it carefully, you can see that it's the hoof mark of Kamapua'a, the pig god. And you can see it just dented right in there into the stone when he was in one of his real hot-blooded escapades that he was doing on this island. But the story we're really talking about is the one on Big Island, because there grew to be almost a rivalry and a love affair between Pele, the volcano goddess, and Kamapua'a, which for these purposes we'll call him the rain god. And the Hawaiians saw this interplay between the rain that brought the green things and the lava which destroyed all of that as sometimes a love battle between Kamapua'a and Pele. And they would see sometimes that it was a battle because the green growing things, their lava would erupt and just wipe them all out. And then after everything is wiped out, here comes the rain and green growing things come back. And that's when they saw it as a rivalry between the two. But then every once in a while, here would be the lava flowing over the land, and here would come the rain. And when it hit, the steam was their lovemaking. But they didn't always get along. And Kamapua'a, being a trickster, even sometimes played tricks on Pele. And sometimes what he liked to do was tease her and taunt her and then rush away faster than she could get him. And one time, the way things happened, why, nobody's sure. There are two different versions. One says that she challenged him to a race, and the other one says that he challenged her. So it all depends on the source of the story. But the kind of race they did was very popular in old Hawaii. It was called holua. And holua is both the name of the race and the name of a sled. Now, we've talked about this once before here, but to remind you, one thing the Hawaiians used to love to do, they would find a hill, usually it was a cinder cone type of hill, you know, nice and, well, it wasn't smooth, but it was smoother than some of the places. And then they would pile up grass, and just big bundles of grass from the top all the way down to the bottom. The longest one I heard of was, it was well over a mile long, okay? But what they would do then, they'd go up to the top, and it was most often chiefs who did this because they had more leisure time than anybody else. But they get up to the top, and they have these narrow sleds, very narrow, that Klug, is that it? Klug or Kluge or something like that. Very similar to that kind of a thing. It was a very narrow sled with runners, and a very narrow place to sit on, to lay down on. And they'd get to the top, and they'd leap on it, and they would race each other to the bottom. And as they go on down to the bottom, and the one who made it the farthest was the one that won. Sometimes they kind of strayed off the grass, and that was kind of dangerous because they'd stray off, and the only place you can stray off onto is lava rocks. I saw, my wife and I, we saw this in action where they still do this on Easter Island. They have this big slope on the side of an extinct volcano, but they don't put any grass down, mainly because there's not enough grass on the island. So what they do is they tie about 6 banana stalks together. And they make what looks more like a raft than a sled. And this is hauled up to the top of the slope by horses. And then they only do it one person at a time. And then the brave person gets on it, and most of them sit and hook their feet down into where the ropes are and hold on to them and slide down as far as they can, or until it hits a rock and throws them off. But we saw some really brave ones who did it standing up, like they were really surfing. Okay? That was amazing. One guy, the guy who won, was standing up all the way down this really long slope, 600-700 yards easily. And but this just shows this is a Polynesian thing. That was the Easter Island version. In the Hawaiian version, they had very finely made sleds, beautifully made, and they would lie down. And then they would, like I said, they would race. So one of the two, either Pele or Kamapua'a, challenged the other to a race down one of the slopes. And so as they raced, Kamapua'a was starting to get ahead. And Pele's coming close after him. But then he started in his shamanic type of style to taunt her, to make fun of her. Okay? Can't catch me, old slowpoke, you know, you're going to get stuck in the lava there. You know, whatever he could make up to get her angry, just for the fun of it. That's what he did. However, he was so much of a trickster and having so much fun taunting her and getting her angry that he kind of forgot who he was getting angry. So from her human form that she started down on the slide, Pele changed into her lava form. And so instead of a beautiful woman on a holua sled chasing after him, Kamapua'a looks back and he sees this wall of lava, molten lava, rushing down at him, and she was just going to, you know, wipe him out because she was so angry. So he's putting on the pressure as fast as he can, using all of his magic. She's getting closer and closer and closer. They're getting right down, all the way bumped off and over the lava rocks and onto the edge of the ocean where the lava normally flows into the sea. And just at the very last moment, she just touched the edge of his sled and off he goes into the ocean. Now, Kamapua'a had several kinds of what are called kino lau, which means many bodies, or different forms that they could take. And fortunately, one of his forms, and this is still true in the legends today, one of his forms was the famous fish of Hawaii that we see. So he goes off the cliff, into the water, turns into a humuhumu nuku apua'a, and escapes with his life. Okay? So that's the story of the race between Pele and Kamapua'a. Now from here, we go into the other way in which I was taught. We can talk about this one a little bit. What it shows, on the one hand, is how the Hawaiians loved to personify the forces of nature. And that's what these were. Pele was not a goddess who lived in some distant place that no one could see. She was not invisible. Sometimes she wasn't visible simply because she was underground, but she might come out at any time, and she was very visible when she came out because she was all of the phenomena of volcanic activity. So we usually talk about it in terms of Pele and her family, okay? But she was the wind, and she was the clouds of smoke that came up, and the lightning that would come out of the clouds, and the molten lava, and all of that. She was not the cold lava rock, okay? She was not that. So that's a whole different thing. But she was all of the phenomena of actual active volcanoes. And whenever the Hawaiians saw something in nature that was extremely powerful, and they would personify it, and anything that powerful in their minds had the ability to take the form of, depending on how powerful it was, usually anything it wanted. So Pele could take the form of usually a woman, an old woman, a mature woman, a young maiden. Those were her common forms. She could also take the form of a dog, although in the stories, there are a lot of stories about a woman walking along with a dog. In the earliest stories, Pele took a dog form. Okay, but this was seen as perfectly normal for someone or something that had so much power they could transform themselves. Okay? Kamapua'a, because of the power of rain, and therefore the power of the green growing things, which was so vital to life, both of those things, also had these powers of transformation. And so one of his was into this fish. Now, one of the reasons the Hawaiians loved a lot of wordplay. So the word for Pele, the goddess, is exactly the same as the word for molten lava. The word Humuhumunukunukuapua'a sounds like a terrible mouthful, but if we take that apart into its pieces, what we see is humuhumu is a type of triggerfish that we see a lot of different kinds in the reefs. Okay? Nuku has a beak. And so this is a triggerfish with a beak or a snout, apua'a, like a pig. And because it reminded them of the snout of a pig, this tiny little fish, the word is bigger than the fish. The fish is about that big, maybe. Okay? And so they saw that association. This obviously had to be a form of the pig god Kamapua'a. So then they loved to tell stories. And most of the stories they told of this nature, there were always different versions, always different variations, but always then, with the storyteller, some purpose in telling them. Okay? And so in this one, there were a lot of different elements involved. You learned about the art of holua sledding, because if I were telling this in the original tale, I'd have to take all the time to tell you how a holua sled was made, and all the things it was made of, and how it was put together. And in the telling of the story, you'd be learning all about that. Okay? You'd be learning about lava and how it flows downhill. You'd be learning about the rain and how sometimes it seems as if the lava is chasing the rain. You can actually see that kind of a thing. Here'll be a rain cloud. The rain will be spreading across the lava slopes, and here comes the lava coming right after it. Well, obviously, Pele is chasing Kamapua'a. But you learn about how all these things interact, how the rain is natural and integrated with the lava, how the lava creates new land and new ground and replenishes and nourishes the land, and then the rain comes and brings life out of that. So many, many different things are told in these stories. Okay? And also the danger of making fun of somebody who's stronger than you. Okay? That's in there as well. Okay? Now we can turn into the other part in just a moment. At this part, what we do is we open it up to question and answer, because this is another way in which I learned this knowledge. We talk about the language, the history, anything having to do with the legends or the one I just talked about, anything about Hawaiian culture, about healing, about, I'm generous this evening, anything that enters your mind. I'll always answer it, but I don't guarantee you'll like the answer. Yes?
Just for people who may be interested in learning more about Kamapua'a, there was a book that came out a few years ago by the Hawaiian scholar Lily Kalakame'elekiva at the University of Hawaii, who looked at Kamapua'a stories that had been published in the Hawaiian language newspapers in the 19th century. She went through and gathered a whole bunch of those, translated them into English with annotation explaining some of the wordplay, some of the ways legends about Kamapua'a changed over time from this wild man to a kind of a more domesticated version later on. But it's a really fascinating book that people who want to read more of some of the additional legends.
Do you know the name of it?
It's called something like Legend of Kamapua'a, the Song of Kamapua'a.
Anyway, look for a book with the word Kamapua'a in it. That's
Yeah.
K-A-M-A.
Me'ele Kiva is the
Right.
translation.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you. He mentioned something a little briefly there, and this was commonly done all over the world as well, where in a particular country or in a particular culture, they might start off with stories of wild men, of the woods, of nature, pan-type beings. And gradually over time, as the priesthoods gained more and more power, why they would incorporate these characters into the settled god pantheon. We see this happened in Egypt, and then later in Greece they just copied with Thoth originally, who was a shamanic type figure. And the equivalent became in the Greek legends, it became Hermes, that the Romans called Mercury, who was originally a shaman figure. So was Dionysius. In fact, Hermes and Dionysius were probably the same figure at one time in history, but then they became, Dionysius never quite, but they became more civilized. Okay? And here in these islands, what happened was Kamapua'a, who started off totally wild, why gradually in the later stories became an ideal model of a chief taking care of his people. Okay? Very, very different from the way it started.